do they go, the smoke rings I blow each night? Oh, what do they do, those circles of blue and white?
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to today's episode of Professionally Cannabis. I'm Johnny Weiser, and with me is my co-host, Oscar Houseman.
Good afternoon, listeners.
So, Oscar, tell me about today's interview.
Well, today's interview took place at Cannabis Business France in Paris, but it's with Andrés Fajardo, the CEO of Clever Leaves.
Nicely pronounced. And yes, Clever Leaves, they're out of Colombia, right?
Yes, they're one of the biggest movers and shakers out there. And actually, since this interview was recorded, they've had more press about exporting into Germany.
And is that for commercial or for research?
Good catch. It's for testing, so the product won't be able to be put into patients' hands just yet, but they've come a long way since their foundation. Anyway, let's roll the interview and you'll be able to hear for yourself. So today's guest is Andrés Fajardo.
Perfect.
From Clever Leaves, Colombia, they were the first licensed exporter. They currently have 8 hectares of commercial growing capacity, and they're looking to begin their export process imminently. Is that right?
That is correct, Oscar.
Great. Well, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So one of the first things we like to ask on Professionally Cannabis is, what brought you to the plant?
Well, it's very interesting because I have a management consulting background. I did my MBA in the United States and, have been working in business and technology for the longest time. And then, my 2 partners, the co-founders and myself, were aware of the changes in regulation in Colombia. We saw the opportunity. And I think most importantly, 2 things. One, we saw that this industry could have a positive impact in patients' lives. And 2, it was an industry in which we thought Colombia had the right to win. And seldom, does that happen. So we jumped on the opportunity.
Awesome. And Colombia is making a lot of noise in the cannabis industry right now. There's quite a few producers out there. How many are going, and how do you cut yourself different to them?
At this moment, there is a large number of licenses, if you will. We estimate somewhere between 60 and 80 producers. I would say we're different really because of scale. I think we are the largest, if not one of the largest right now in Colombia with our operations. 2, we have a GMP, quality focus on pharmaceutical production. We have a very significant innovation and research team, and we have demonstrated commercial efforts. For example, we're the only company in Colombia that in 2018 obtained commercialization quotas by the government.
For our audience, what is a commercialization quota?
Well, the Colombian regulation is very interesting because it's pretty comprehensive. But beyond that, it's also aligned with international drug conventions. That means, the INCB, that's part of the United Nations, basically assigns a quota to each country for the amount of product they can produce, in this case, cannabis. And then the Colombian government subsequently assigns that quotas to the different companies. And we were the only one in 2018 to get that quotas for commercial purposes. 5 companies in total got quotas for scientific purposes, and only 1 company got it for commercial purposes as well, and that's us. So we got both.
Okay, great. So when Colombia starts exporting cannabis for commercial purposes, it can only be Clever Leaves right now?
Well, at this precise moment, yes, because we have our mother plants on the ground, and that's, of course, for psychoactive cannabis. Remember, in Colombia, there's a distinction between psychoactive cannabis and non-psychoactive cannabis. You need the quota for anything you want to do over 1% THC. You don't need the quota for non-psychoactive cannabis.
So are you growing hemp as well?
We're growing, cannabis that has, different ratios, if you will, of CBD, THC, and other cannabinoids. Colombian regulation only allows for medical cannabis, and 2, it only allows for extracts or oils.
Oh, so no flower?
No flower. So we are in the capacity of producing oils under 1% content of THC, and we're in the capacity of producing, high THC oils as well.
And let's talk about that scale, actually, because I remember when I met your team at Cannabis, they talked a little bit about the CO2 distillation. So are you able to speak to the amount of oil you'll be able to produce for export? How big is the addressable market, do you think?
Well, first of all, you're asking about exports, and that's what we're focused on. We're targeting basically 3 main regions. The first one is Europe, second one Canada, and third one Latin America. The addressable market is still to be defined how big that is. We know that at this moment that it's growing dramatically for CBD products as well as for medical cannabis products. And this year, we're expecting to export around 3,000 kilograms of oil.
And is that all psychoactive oil?
Well, that's a combination. I think most probably at the beginning, the percentage of non-psychoactive will probably be greater. And then, I think it's going to balance itself out in the coming years.
And let's circle back to your 3 addressable markets. Normally, we concentrate on the European market, but I'm interested in the Latin American export market. How many countries are open for import of either psychoactive or non-psychoactive oils?
Well, right now, Colombia is for sure the country that's farthest away. Uruguay is probably further, developed as well, but it's very small. So right now we're looking at 2 main markets with potentially be Mexico and Brazil. Mexico is a lot more advanced in terms of the regulation. I think with the new government that just came in a few months back, they've expressed that they want to open, the cannabis market. And I think Mexico can become a country that's interesting both for its market and also for its production capacities. Brazil is one of those countries that you have to have an eye on. It's going to take a lot more time, but it's definitely, very close to us, geographically and culturally. So that's one of the big countries that we have on our focus within Latin America.
Okay, great. So we've talked a bit about markets and scale. Let's talk about genetics and the actual product. So I know that you've got an agronomist in your team who comes with 30 years of experience in cannabis. And I just wondered if you could tell our audience, how do you select your genetics? What are you looking for? And are you trialing anything interesting or new?
Sure. Genetics for us is going to become the key differentiating factor. What happened up to now is that we have over 150 genetics that are pre-registered with the Agricultural Authority. We have 20 that are being, whose registration is being completed this week. And
will you have 20 different varieties?
20 different varieties right now. And the remaining 130, we're already characterizing and understanding in detail for what? One, nobody really knows how to grow cannabis the way we're growing it in Colombia. At the beginning, we thought there was going to be a lot of best practice transfer from the original growers in cannabis in Colombia to the legal industry, but that wasn't the case, of course. The genetics are not the same. Cultivation protocols are not the same. Nothing is really the same. So there is very little of that. So we basically, are having to develop the techniques on how to grow these plants. So we have to do a lot of genetic selection, right? But that's the very basic step. Further along the line, we're going to start looking at strains with higher THCV contents, higher CBG contents, different profiles of terpenes. And that's going to become very, very important as we start moving from a generic CBD to THC ratio to indication-specific genetics. And I think that's where the world is going, and we'll have an advantage there as we have, like if you go in a supermarket and you have a lot of genetics to pick from. That's kind of our bet.
Okay. And keeping on the topic of sort of where things are going, a lot of people talk about the commoditization of cannabis, saying if it becomes a commodity, then it's hard to make margins. How do you, as growers, protect yourself from that potential future?
2 things. The most important one is that we are really focusing on value add further downstream in the value chain. We believe this is going to be a market of differentiate products. Products with better usability, safer to use, easier to use, more effective in the way it's administered to the body. 2, we believe you have to build brands, to build the right distribution channels. And if you are a company that really has differentiated products, channels, and brands, then you're really thinking of the commoditization of the raw material, if you will. That's what we're working on. And we really are not a growing company. We're a value add company. And 2, I think if you're thinking of, the THC and CBD production, it's going to commoditize. That means prices are going to drop, quality is going to be standardized, etc. So we think, the way we think about it is our grow operations going forward are most probably not going to be basic THC and CBD. That probably we're going to buy from someone else. We're going to focus on the more sophisticated, if you will, cannabinoids or terpenes that are harder to grow, harder to find. We're probably going to focus on genetics more than growing itself. So that's the way we see it. And we don't want to be long-term just, one more producer of raw material that has to have shrinking margins. We see ourselves as a high value add downstream part of the value chain.
So that sounds a bit like strain hunting. Do you have any clinical research or partnerships that will help you with deciding your genetics or deciding which ones you wish to grow?
That's a very good question. We have 150 genetics, and those are pre-registered. So we have those, and those are the ones we're going to probably have to use. Which ones to grow? And I think it goes to exactly your point. The way we're seeing this is Colombia gives you access to, 40 million people, 50 million people, right? And it's a very big potential market. And one of the things we want to do is be able to give Colombian patients access to the best medical cannabis in the world, but at the same time be able to understand what's really working in those patients. So for instance, let's say you have an indication and you're giving them, cannabis that's 1-to-1 THC to CBD. So the way we're intending to do that is really understand which is the strain that better helps the different patients, really run some analytics on that data. Then we're going to be able to really understand which are the elements that are helping. And I don't think it's just CBD and THC 1-to-1. That's where it's going. That's what we're planning to do.
Okay, I was interested to hear about the Colombian patient market, actually, and in general how medical cannabis works in Colombia. So are you able to talk about that a bit more? Maybe, is it stigmatized in Colombia or is it accepted medicine? How many patients are there on the books and what sort of process do they go through? And how will you get their data for your observational studies?
Right now, the medical cannabis has not reached the Colombian patients legally, if you will. There's clearly a demand. I think as in any countries, there are doctors that are more pro-cannabis, and think that, the evidence available is enough to prescribe it. Others that believe, there's still a lot way to go. The way we're facing the Colombian market is twofold. One is we're working in doctor education. So we created actually the first course for doctors.
Doctor education.
Yeah, doctor education around cannabis. We brought in a large number of specialists, nothing about our brand or our products. It was just around cannabis, endocannabinoid system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we're working on that. And two, we're striking these partnerships with research institutions and universities in Colombia to do, this research that I was talking about. We do not see it really as a huge commercial opportunity. We see it as a huge opportunity to, one, give Colombians access to the best medical cannabis, and two, we will be able to really understand what's working and what's not. And that's going to benefit the public, it's going to benefit the company. So that's the way really we see the Colombian medical market, if you will.
And when you were talking about the Colombian patient situation, so export was allowed before patients were able to get medicine in their own country. Does that mean that Colombia's medical cannabis laws have been driven from a perhaps more economic bent than a patient-led one?
I don't think so. I think the initiative was really pushed by the Ministry of Health, and it continues to be so. But nevertheless, the government, I guess, sees the benefit, the economical benefit that can be derived from this. So, the Colombian authorities are being careful so that, this path to market of medical cannabis doesn't become, in any way a path for recreational or illegal cannabis. So they're making sure that this magistral formula labs, have the proper licenses, etc. That's probably what's taking a little bit more time. So, I don't think that it's because they are more focused on the economics. I think they're very focused on the health, but they just want to make sure that it's really well oriented around health. They want to make sure it's safe for patients. So I think it's a matter of getting it right rather than getting it too fast.
And I just wanted to get an idea, how does your distribution network look? What were the processes it took to, say, ship to Canada? Was it a joint venture with a Canadian distributor, or do you have subsidiaries there?
Sure. Well, first, we have an office in Canada, which we do business development from. We're setting up offices in Europe as well. And basically how this worked is we had an agreement with a lab in Canada. We basically agreed for them to run some tests on our product. So basically we applied for the import permit. We got it. Then we applied for the export permit from Colombia. We got it. First of its kind, of course. But it worked really well. A lot of myths were broken, and, it took the product, 6 hours or 8 hours to clear customs. So it was faster than a bag, I guess. And
will commercial imports follow as well?
I don't know. Of course, that's the idea. But
is the registration process much different to the research one?
Well, yeah, I think it's a path. It's a path to get there, right? This first import process, I think, was important because, one, it showed that we have the quality of product that you would want. It demonstrated that, from a regulatory compliance standpoint, we're a company, and there are companies out there that can comply with, stringent regulations like those of Health Canada. And thirdly, that you have a traceable, reliable, secure supply chain. So that we've proven. Now, the next thing is starting to move closer to the commercial operations. Is it going to be immediate? No, I don't think so. Is it going to take some time? Most probably. And it's something that we have to work with our Canadian partners, with Canadian regulators, etc. So it's a process, the way we see it.
Cool. And then you talked a little bit about setting up offices in Europe. So I actually have two questions I want to ask the back of that. So one is, what sort of roles are you hiring for? There may be listeners who are interested in working for Clever Leaves. And what's it like to work on your team? Maybe you can sell the dream.
Very, very, very good questions. We are looking for business development. We're looking for marketing and sales roles, both in the consumer side of things as well as in the pharmaceutical side of things. And we're mostly looking for people initially, I'd say, for the UK and Germany, and then growing from there. When we started this company, we've always had a concept that's called the mojo, and for us, mojo is achieved when people are, loving what they do and, being optimistic and shouting it to the world, and this is actually a definition by a famous writer called Marshall Goldsmith. And we've always said that one of the purposes of starting this company was to make sure that people work like that. And I think we're able to create a culture in which people, have short-term happiness, if you will, so they enjoy what they're doing, but at the same time, the company allows them somehow to achieve their long-term purpose. And that's really what our differentiator has been. And, whenever anybody goes to visit us, they get very impressed with the scale, the quality, blah, 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 blah. But no matter the background of a person visiting us, they always comment on the people's attitude, commitment, expertise in the company. And that's not achieved if you just, pay people and have a transactional relationship. We don't have transactional relationships. We have a true relationship in which we see the company, operating through this mojo concept and really enabling us, to move faster, be more assertive in everything we do, be more precise. So that's what it's like.
Does that culture come from you and your co-founders? Can you tell us about your co-founders? What's your relationship?
I had a consulting background. I then was the CEO of a company that had 800 people at the time. And we grew to 2,400 people while I was there. And that's then that I understood that it was not how smart I was or how good my ideas were. It was to what extent I was able to really convey this idea and inspire people to do better. That's what's going to really make a difference. And that's what's really going to be able to pull you out of a difficult situation. We learned that. And that's with one of my co-founders, Gustavo. We worked together in this company for 6 years. We decided to actually go and set up a company builder, which was called or is called Mojo Ventures. And it was
the same mojo concept.
Well, it's a concept in which we don't bet on the idea, we bet on the people. You speak to all of these venture capital firms and 9 out of 10 investments fail. So you ask them why. The answer is always the same. People, people, people. And so our concept was around betting on the people rather than the ideas. And so we had a concept, but 3 months into Mojo Ventures, this idea came along. And this idea came along because of our third partner, Julian. He used to be the drug policy director for the Ministry of Justice in Colombia, and he used to work for the General Attorney's Office and the U.S. Embassy, etc. And he said, the regulation is changing. I think we should get into this. And we started. But it's really ingrained in the culture right now. That's the way we operate. I mean, if you talk to anybody out of the 250 people we have right now.
250 people, wow. How long has it taken to grow to that number?
14 months. We've become the largest employer in the town where cultivation is. We have, 75% are women. Out of those, something like 60% are single moms, if you will, and that's really having an impact in the city, and that's part of the purpose for some of us. So there are many ways in which we can ensure short-term happiness today. Enjoy what you do, but at the same time, fulfill your longer-term goals and your purposes. And we think that's what's giving us the advantage.
Nice. And so when you were these three co-founders with your business idea, seeking investment, how did you fund the company at first? Have you gone to the public markets or friends and family rounds?
No, we haven't. So at the beginning, we started, each of us didn't have a salary, of course, and we, got credits, and we started by that. And, Mojo Ventures worked, and we generated some cash and funded the company. And we started the fundraising process in, end of Q1 2017. Initially, we went to the Colombian, potential partners for the company. But, in Colombia, investors are not as risk prone. When you say cannabis, they say, no, what are you thinking? Blah, blah. It was many years ago. So we started looking at international, investors. So we had quite a few, that basically were throwing LOIs at us and, saying, hey, it doesn't matter. We'll just float this company. And we have shell companies in Canada, we'll make a quick buck. We said, this is not what we want. We want to build a proper business. There are reasons behind why we're doing this. And when we met Northern Swan is a, U.S. Canadian fund that has offices in Europe, in Colombia. It's cannabis focused, very strategic people looking to build businesses rather than just, make a quick buck. And, we've funded the company since then via Northern Swan. I'd say they're more than our capital partner. They're really our partner. And, I think we've had a very good combination between what they do on us, making sure things happen, they are implemented, and we're happy.
And what's their end vision for you? I say end. Do you think they'll take you to IPO? Is that on the horizon?
We don't know. We don't know. We're going to do what's ever best for the company, if you will. And, time will tell if an IPO is the right way to go. I mean, if you look, for example, at our history, we've been a lot more focused on building the business rather than telling everybody what we're doing. Now that we have it kind of built, we are telling it a little bit more, but we're focusing on building the business. So whenever we think that it's time to do an IPO, we'll probably go after it. If we don't, well, we won't.
Makes sense. Something I just thought of, because we're here in Paris for the Cannabis Business France conference. Do you have any designs on the French market? I know it's quite difficult to get into from a lot of different regulatory perspectives, especially for psychoactive.
Yes, I think, regulation in France, has been slow to happen, I guess. And, it's been moving forward one step, then back two, and then forward two. And, it's kind of there. However, I think France is a very important country in many respects. I think in the healthcare industry, it's a forward-thinking country. Sooner rather than later, regulation will come into place, particularly for, medical cannabis. That's what we're focused on, really. So that's why we're here. That's why we have an eye on France, understanding if we can strike some partnerships around, research and that kind of areas in which I think the French are pioneers as well. So that's how we see it. And I think it's a country you have to be in. I think this is the beginning of times in cannabis, if you will, for France. So, we want to be close. And we think, France is one of those countries that can move others in Europe, if you will.
I feel for France, it seems like they have a strong preference for cosmetic products from CBD. Does Clever Leaves have any oil or products that could be used in cosmetics, or is it all designed for pharmaceutical purposes?
The products that have THC, which have to be prescribed by a doctor, are for pharmaceutical. But, we think on the CBD side of the business, that's a non-doctor's prescribed part of the business. So it's a possibility. It's not happening right now, but eventually that's an option. And cosmetics and it's a market you have to really think through how you're going to tackle it, because cosmetics by itself is a hard market to go fight with. There are very strong brands with very large distribution. So you have to understand the consumer, and you have to understand how to tackle that consumer. The way we see it in cosmetics in particular is, you cannot think of just getting a CBD product out there and having the CBD lovers buy it. That's really not an interesting opportunity. What's interesting is how to make CBD cosmetics, if you will, a mainstream products for mainstream cosmetic users. And that's where I think strategies in terms of product, branding, pricing, and channels will change. And that's something we're working on.
Cool. I think we've got time for maybe one or two more questions. So firstly, I'd like to ask, what's your ideal regulatory state for cannabis? So I know you mentioned in Colombia, at least, there's a great fear of going towards an adult use or recreational market. Do you share those concerns?
Look, right now we're really focused on the medical use. We think it's an issue that every country has to solve by itself. Our opinion will really not be valid in saying, in France, they should or should not, approve recreational or adult use of cannabis. We're focused on the medical. What I kind of tell you is that for us, good regulation is one that's very clear, that articulates very well what has to happen between the institutions in a given country, and that articulates within an institution who has to do what, what the accountabilities are, etc. But we rather have a very clear system that actually controls this industry swiftly and efficiently. So that's what we are looking for, and we think there are many countries that are going towards that path, and for sure, navigating that regulation, and by navigating I mean finding ways to be compliant with this regulation and really understanding how it works and the rationale of it is going to become a competitive advantage in cannabis, at least at the beginning. Eventually, everybody will know. But at the beginning, that's key. So that's what we're looking for in a regulation.
Cool. And then as my final question, is there anything that Clever Leaves is doing that we haven't discussed yet that you think our listeners ought to hear about?
No, I think it's clear that we're a company that's focused on scale and quality, right? We're all of our cultivation is GACP and our manufacturing is GMP, about to be certified in
And is that by the German officials flying out?
Yeah, it's European, so it's really high quality. 1, 2, we're research driven. We want to have the best product. We have a medical advisory board. We have doctors working with us. We have, pharma R&D people working with us to make, products differentiated, safer, more precise in terms of dosages. And I'd say thirdly, we are a company that is looking to have an impact as well. And we are the largest employer where we operate right now. We are a good neighbor in our community from a sustainability standpoint. And I think that's something that the cannabis industry, that's a very questioned industry in many places of the world. We have to play that way. We have to play the right way. Our sustainability work, our work with the communities, with the people, that we employ, I think is very good. It's very transparent. It doesn't mean that there are no issues. Of course there are issues, but the issue is not that if there are issues, the issue is how you solve them, how you interact with people. For example, in the area where we operate, they're very cautious about the environment. So to give you an idea, about 80% of the water that we use for our crops is actually water that falls on our greenhouses, and we recollect. So we are aware of what matters to people, and we want to make the company sustainable, which I think is neat.
I think it's a lovely note to end on. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Oscar.
Where do they go, the smoke rings I blow each night? Oh, what do they do, those circles of blue and white? Why do they seem to picture a dream of
Johnny, I'm trying to do the outro now.
All right.
Well, listeners, I hope that concluded an interesting chapter on the changing drug story coming out of Colombia for you.
And something that never changes. Please pass on the pod to any friends or colleagues. Like, share and subscribe. And if you give us a lovely 5-star review, we might just give you a shout out next week.
Until then, ta-ra.
love.